I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is having words. This is on an interview that Peter Duke did of Jasun Horsley on trauma and mothers, magic and money, world wars and word wars. And as promised, I'm recording this on my Stairway to Oz, my metallic staircase that I was painting during the time that I was listening to the interview. But it was so fascinating that I kept having to take notes, so I admit I didn't get much painting done. This was brought to my attention by Kate Smiley, who posted in my comments, "Hello, dear Teresa. I'm not sure the best way to contact you, but I do know that you read your comments. In fact, the comment threads on your Substack are among the best of any. You have a stunning audience. I could not agree more." So here goes. I listened to the Duke Report on YouTube today as I love the conversations between Peter Duke and Jasun Horsley, and this one did not disappoint. Jasun was discussing his book, Big Mother, which I am yet to read but have had a look at. It is his newer project that made me think immediately of you. He is doing a deep and dangerous dive into World War II. Here is the link in case you are interested. They are both very interested in language, so it may be enjoyable for you. And indeed it was. I love listening to Peter Duke because he interviews the way that I do, which is more of a conversation. In this case, he could have allowed Jasun to get a few more words in edgewise, but since everything was on point, I couldn't begrudge it. And since Jasun is questioning the validity of words themselves, maybe that's fair. Peter is good friends with George Webb, fellow Malone tracker. George had retweeted a clip of my video, Malone's $1 Million Pity Party, where I quote Malone as saying, "Having threatened to sue if the defamation is not rectified, you are left with two choices, tuck your tail and walk away or follow through. Suffice to say, I am not one to tuck. Yes, an intentional double entendre." Now that the case has been dismissed, with a potential slap suit pending, he might wish that he was one to tuck. Faith, hubris, and high weirdness. Jasun Horsley describes himself as a transmedia storyteller, independent scholar, and existential detective of high weirdness. He lives in Spain, and in another synchronicity, his wife is the sister of Guy Duperreault. Guy had already drawn my attention to Jasun's Substack, Children of Job, where faith and hubris meet. We have a lot of overlap on biblical themes. Every one of Jasun's book titles makes me want to read it. Here are some. Prisoner of Infinity, Social Engineering, UFOs, and the Psychology of Fragmentation. The Vice of Kings, How Socialism, Occultism, and the Sexual Revolution Engineered a Culture of Abuse. 16 Maps of Hell, The Unraveling of Hollywood Superculture. The Secret Life of Movies, Schizophrenia, and Shamanic Journeys in American Cinema. And the Kubrickon, The Cult of Kubrick, Attention Capture, and the Inception of AI. I can see why Pasheen Stonebrook would be a subscriber. The topic of Peter's interview was premised on Jasun's latest book, Big Mother, The Technological Body of Evil. I say premised, however, because it went far afield and deep underground into some of my favorite rabbit holes, including the origin of that phrase itself. In the same vein, I'm going to capture some of their 2-hour conversation and add my thoughts on mothers and trauma, word magic and NLP, Nazism and storytelling, autism and magnetism, schismogenesis and the prisoner's dilemma, ontology, and unsuspending disbelief around World War II. Let's start digging. The mothership. The intriguing hypothesis of Big Mother is that the primary driving force of human civilization is the desire to create through technology a replica of the mother's body, and then disappear into it. This is a place of safety and comfort, the ultimate shelter from stormy vicissitudes. From the initial trauma of birth to the overly connected or disconnected bonding with the mother, we are driven to return to the womb. The New Age secular religion of Gaia and Mother Earth, the photos from space, see the world as the mother's body. The metaverse and transhumanism promise total immersion into the bloodless simulacrum of reality through technology. Jason mentions that both brothers who wrote and directed The Matrix are now transgender sisters, going further into reality as self-written and self-directed. The word matrix, of course, comes from the root of matri, for mother. The film portrays reality as harsh and warlike, masculine, while the fantasy world is feminine. To take the red pill is to be in constant danger of pain and death. There is no comfort, only grit. In a piece that I wrote called The Gnostic and the Atheist, I debate my husband on whether the Matrix has it backwards. We're in an illusion of pain and death, suffering and danger, but reality is an ever-expanding kaleidoscope of delight and imagination. As a mother, that's the reality I design for my children. Is God less competent, or does he love his children less than I love mine? I think that we are all motherless orphans, more so than any other place and time. Women have been empowered to become men, not true men, but toxic men, eating the poison apple of the corporate, incorporeal life. The successful businesswoman isn't disembodied and may have a gym membership to prove it. She's disenwombed. The body has no engendered function. She's a businessman with boobs. Or, as I say of certain politicians, a patriarch without a penis. The lure of immersive gaming is stronger, I believe, for men than women, and stronger for autistic than non-autistic of both genders. And Jason identifies that way. I've wondered whether autism is a feature and not a bug of vaccines, an altering of human nature. But the rise in autism also matches the increase in two-income families and housing competition that made that a choice for one generation and then a requirement. It's a shift in nurture. Jason suggests that what autism may be, in its most spiritual sense, is the underground network that will never be discovered by the powers that be. It's an invisible tribe. I've seen autism as the masculine side of the brain in logic and reason without the feminine of intuition and feeling. The gestation of a baby and concomitant mind shift, that's what makes mothers different than men. The mother mind would be the opposite end of the spectrum from the autistic male. It's the mother load. Reframing reality. Peter then said, words and money are the original antediluvian magic. You can use words to reframe reality and use money to reshape economics. Unless you're talking about empirical reality, all word use is based on faith. If we weren't there and we didn't experience it, we need faith that the words represent reality. The trick about magic is that we exist in a magical world right now. Laws are a certain kind of word magic. The shared belief in them controls behavior. This was also said by Yuval Noah Harari, the Weffy we love to hate, that nations are a form of legal shamanism and we can withdraw our belief in them. While he meant in favor of a global world order, it could also be in favor of what we'd like to see. Peter mentioned James Corbett talking about Yuval saying in Sapiens that mankind is a story-based civilization. The his story is one story on top of another. Jasun brought up the stories we tell ourselves, or the stories that are ourselves. There's the narrative and counter-narrative, creating dichotomy as mind control. Always, he states, between the extremes is the truth. I would say that the continuum itself is mind control. The Overton window isn't just the frame, it's also the plane of two-dimensional glass that stops the imagination from going beyond it. Opening that window and sticking out my neck is the whole idea behind the third paradigm. There's a third dimension we're not even considering. By happenstance, while painting my Stairway to Oz, I listened to an old James Corbett on the 1951 sci-fi story And Then There Were None by Eric Frank Russell. It also made the point that language is an act of faith, and the hidden meaning of cooperation is obedience in the sense of, will you come freely or do I need to drag you? As A Course in Miracles says, we've gotten used to accepting contradictions in our words without giving them a second thought. Hypnosis made sleazy. Peter gives a brief history of neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, as a military psyop that was a shortcut for hypnosis. It deployed pattern analysis to channel the listener into a meta model using the formula of delete, distort, and generalize. It could convert ideas into language using universal quantifiers that put the subject into a state of cognitive dissonance, a trance state of suspending disbelief. I remember when I started my YouTube in the summer of 2021, we were asking in the comments what you'd call a domestic program to psychologically manipulate people. We decided on psyops, although that was typically against a foreign enemy. How innocent we were, how naive. Now Heather B. sells a t-shirt saying unpsyopable, along with an outrageously great post. Thanks to the diva for recommending. On a note that Peter and George Webb will appreciate, a reader drew my attention to Brecht Anert, a Belgian dissident and friend of Matthias Desmet, who interviewed Robert Malone in July 2022. Later, in a private email, Brecht accused Malone of using hypnosis techniques. Jill responded publicly, writing, "We, Robert and I, have given up everything, including ever seeing our grandchildren again. We have given up our family because we feel that these vaccines, mandates, lockdowns, WEF, globalism are evil." This post is mean, slanderous, and not true. Brecht, you should be ashamed of yourself. We went to Belgium. We didn't charge for speaking, as usual. We did it because this cause, the world, is so important to us. Future generations matter. I am sorry that you felt hypnotized, as you wrote to me, not Robert, privately. That you felt he hypnotized you in the interview was aggressive. Frankly, your comments are bizarre and bullying. Robert did not hypnotize you. He spoke science. Sorry if it went over your head and you felt overwhelmed. That is not hypnosis. This is called dialogue. Grow up. You were interviewing him, not the other way around. All the people supporting your position here just proves how mean and naive people can be. Robert is talking about just stopping being in the fight. You all will lose one of the most important voices in this fight. You all should be ashamed. We most definitely will not be going back to Belgium to help there, as he is obviously unwelcome. Robert is slated to testify in American courts against the government and Pfizer. His declining those hearings will weaken the cases being brought to trial. This will be your legacy. ruining the one scientist willing to testify. Nasty, horrible people who will reap what they sow. Enjoy your future. Your purity test will only hurt you, but maybe that is your legacy. One day, I hope, you will look back and realize the damage the mob has done. The mob certainly didn't deserve Robert volunteering his time to come to Belgium and work for your cause for free. Brecht's response is intelligent and worth reading in the original comment that I'll have linked in the Substack. But it was Jill's over-the-top outrage to an email not even addressed to her that I wanted to cite. It's Jill's father, remember, who worked for British intelligence in psychological operations. This episode that I did, Truth is Like a Chameleon, links 16 episodes I've done on Malone and happens to include a response to Guy on Lord of the Flies. When I look back at Malone's initial Dark Horse podcast, or the Hawaii Kid Talk, where Jill is mouthing the words in the background, he's very clearly using these techniques. His style is completely different than the CIA jocker room jargon he employs with his biowarfare bro, Black Pill Hatfill. In the interview I analyzed with Aubrey Marcus in Phony Maloney and Wikispooks, he deletes, distorts, and generalizes. It's a textbook example, along with the slow, hypnotic pace of his conversation. I point out where he pretends to be agreeing, but then states the opposite. There is no question that Brecht is right, but it's the nastiness of Jill's response for Mr. I Don't Tuck that really shows their two faces. The Trivium isn't trivial. Peter quotes Guido Giacomo Preparata that liberty is freedom within limits, essentially a leash. Guido has written The Ideology of Tyranny, The Incubation of Nazism, and Conjuring Hitler, which two of my readers have recommended to me. Peter states ontology is overrated, but Jason asks, doesn't finding out the truth have its own teleology, destiny, purpose? He believes that we can't ever know the truth, but his goal is to unsuspend the disbelief in order to knock the story off its pedestal. Jason's current endeavor is to cast out the lies of World War II and recognize the ways in which he's submitted to them. He states that he was born into that narrative as it was being crystallized, as was I. He sees the trivium, using grammar, logic, and rhetoric to understand what's true, as corrupted by imbibing false narratives. I would add that, like NLP, it creates cognitive dissonance between what we really know to be true and what we're submitting to as true, preventing us from thinking any deeper. Peter mentions that NLP had a hard time with German. Why was that? Is it the language that is less imprecise and vulnerable to twisting? Guido lost his job at the University of Washington because he cited David Irving 2 times in Conjuring Hitler, Peter adds. He thinks David got crucified because he got sloppy, and points out that David foolishly sued Lipstadt, as I write about in the Trials of David Irving. I encourage reading my article to see if he was really foolish and sloppy, or, like Julian Assange, courageous to be the example of how far they'd go. But why is Ron Unz still able to publish, Peter queries. Is he controlling the opposition? Jason speculates that maybe Unz establishes the edges of the Overton window. He clarifies that it was Tacitus and not Voltaire who wrote, "If you would know who controls you, see who you may not criticize." This is significant because a search on the quote says it wasn't Voltaire, but a neo-Nazi white nationalist who penned it, according to Reuters fact check. So the misattribution is being used to smear it. but adding Tacitus brings it up correctly. Tacitus left no doubt who he was talking about, those for whom even Roman statesmen spoke in whispers. I don't think this was the Judeans who had been evicted from Judea for their rebellion against Rome. I think this was the Davidic dynasty and their high priest tax masters who were saved by Josephus and Vespasian in that rebellion. In ending, I'll look at some of Peter and Jason's comments that are very interesting about words. Jason states that nonfiction is disguised fiction, and I'm sure Peter agrees with the Duke Report byline, "All news is made up, some of it is true." Jason comments that we only have 1% of the facts, enough to make a coherent narrative, but not enough to be true. Peter quotes Clay Shirky that there are two kinds of people, those who think the world makes sense and those who try to make sense of the world. He also quotes Ezra Pound, who said that original thought stopped in the 1400s with the invention of the printing press, and Marshall McLuhan, whose master's thesis was on the loss of the Trivium and why we don't have the tools to tell if something is false and argue against it, and Gregory Bateson on schismogenesis and the sleight of mouth, 14 retorts to anything. And in some of my episodes on David Graeber, I talk about schismogenesis, which is the tendency to push away. Peter mentions fiction writers who set us up for the New World Order: H.G. Wells, Philip K. Dick, Anthony Burgess, and Kubrick's encoded messages. He explains the military's scenario planning of hiring classified writers to imagine futures you'd like to bring about, forming the cognitive structures to make this happen. An example he gives is the military-funded fiction of The Prisoner's Dilemma. It set the stage for the concept of mutually assured destruction, justifying the nuclear buildup as a deterrent. I'm sure the preemptive strike is another Army brain brat. Jason mentions elsewhere that religions say God is unknowable. The answer to all this is to not depend on any of these tools: language, reason, logic. Pure spontaneity and being present in nature is the only escape. He's looking to give up words altogether and turn his property in Spain into a silent retreat. This strikes me, for someone who paywalls his Substack, as a means of having the last word. As I've mentioned, my mom made it impossible to win an argument because she always ended with, "We'll never know the truth," even if you could look it up. It makes me wonder if that's one of the 14 retorts to anything that Bateson calls a sleight of mouth. Real mothering and real argumentation are both in artificially created scarcity, designed that way by the powers that be, the ones we're not allowed to criticize. If they think these are so powerful that they could undo every self-serving lie they've wrought, why should we give them up willingly? Instead, let's build an economy that puts children at the center, surrounded by mothers, surrounded by men, as I define tonic masculinity. And let's use facts and logic to dismantle the house of lies, and words to make real the communities we want, forming the cognitive structures first in our imagination. I think that's how we're going to win. I have only skimmed the surface of this wonderful conversation, so I encourage you to go to my Substack where there will be the link. And I also have 5 episodes linked there that touch on different topics. One on my Hitler journey that summarizes all of the different episodes that I've made, and all of my different episodes on Malone. But in particular, I would recommend When Mothers Ran the World on David Graeber, and this one on how to have a better argument. Thank you for watching.